The Gallic warriors, starving between Caesar's double walls. In the autumn of 52 BC, 80,000 Gallic warriors were trapped inside a hilltop fortress in eastern Gaul, surrounded by Roman siege works that stretched for miles in every direction. Their leader was Vercingetorix, a young Gallic chieftain who had united dozens of warring tribes against Rome. He had chosen Alesia as a trap, planning to pin Caesar between the garrison inside and a massive relief army coming from outside. Caesar saw the terrain and knew a direct assault would fail. Instead, he ordered his legions to build a continuous wall of fortifications around the entire hilltop, 11 miles long, with towers every 80 feet and trenches 20 feet wide. Then Caesar did something no general had ever attempted. He built a second wall facing outward, 14 miles long, to defend against the Gallic relief army he knew was coming. His army was now sandwiched between two sets of fortifications, besieging and besieged at the same time. In front of both walls, Caesar's engineers planted rows of sharpened stakes hidden in pits, iron hooks buried in the grass, and 5 rows of interlocking branches with pointed tips. The Romans called the hidden pits lilies. Anything that charged the wall would be impaled before it arrived. Inside Alesia, the food ran out fast. 80,000 warriors and the entire civilian population of the town were sharing supplies meant to last 30 days. Vercingetorix rationed every grain of barley, but the portions shrank each week. The Gauls made a desperate decision. They expelled the women, children, and elderly from Alesia to save food for the fighters. The civilians walked to the Roman lines, begging to be taken as slaves. Caesar refused to let them through. They starved in the open ground between the walls. Weeks passed. The warriors inside Alesia boiled leather and chewed bark. Some Gallic leaders proposed surrender. Others proposed eating the dead. Vercingetorix held them together by force of will, insisting the relief army was coming. The relief army finally arrived. Ancient sources claim it numbered over 200,000 warriors drawn from almost every tribe in Gaul, though modern estimates put it closer to 100,000. They camped on a hillside 3 miles from the outer wall. The Gauls attacked from both sides simultaneously. The relief army charged the outer wall, while Vercingetorix launched sorties against the inner wall. The Romans fought on 2 fronts at once, racing between the walls to plug gaps wherever the line buckled. On the 3rd day, the Gauls found a weak point in the outer wall, where a steep hill had prevented the Romans from completing the defenses. 60,000 warriors poured through the gap. The Roman line began to collapse. Caesar grabbed 4 cohorts and his cavalry reserve, rode behind the outer wall, and hit the Gallic breakthrough from the rear. The Gauls saw the red cloaks coming from behind and panicked. The relief army broke and scattered across the countryside. The next day, Vercingetorix rode out of Alesia in full armor, circled Caesar on his horse, and threw his weapons at Caesar's feet. He was taken to Rome in chains, paraded through the streets 6 years later, and strangled in a prison cell. Caesar's double wall at Alesia remains one of the greatest engineering feats in military history. 25 miles of fortifications built in 1 month, defended on 2 fronts against overwhelming numbers. The men who held those walls survived because the walls never broke. Hey, if you've made it this far, you're my kind of person. Hit subscribe and I'll keep the stories coming. The Rhodians, standing against the largest siege tower ever built. In 305 BC, a fleet of 200 warships appeared off the coast of Rhodes, carrying 40,000 soldiers and the most advanced siege equipment the ancient world had ever seen. The man leading the attack was Demetrius, son of one of Alexander the Great's generals. He had already conquered Cyprus and earned a reputation for building war machines no one had seen before. The Greeks called him Poliorcetes, the besieger. Rhodes was a trading republic with a powerful navy, sitting at the entrance to the Aegean Sea. Demetrius wanted to break its alliance with Egypt and use the island as a military base. The Rhodians had roughly 7,000 defenders against his 40,000. Demetrius attacked the harbor first, mounting siege towers on pairs of ships lashed together. The Rhodians hit them with catapults from the harbor walls and sent fire ships into the fleet at night. Every floating tower was destroyed before it reached the docks. After the harbor attacks failed, Demetrius ordered the construction of the Helepolis, the city taker. It was the largest siege tower ever built, roughly 130 feet tall and 60 feet wide, covered in iron plates on 3 sides to resist fire. The tower had 9 floors connected by 2 staircases, one for going up and one for coming down. Each floor held catapults and bolt throwers aimed through shuttered ports that could be opened and closed mechanically. It was a moving fortress packed with artillery. Moving it required 3,400 men working in relays. Some pushed from inside, others from behind. The entire machine weighed roughly 360,000 pounds and rolled on 8 wheels, each 15 feet tall, with iron-plated rims. It could move in any direction. The Rhodians countered with everything they had. They launched night raids to set the tower on fire. They dug countermines beneath its path. They channeled water and sewage onto the ground ahead of it, turning the approach into a bog that nearly swallowed the machine. The Rhodians promised freedom to every slave who fought in the defense. They offered citizenship to any foreigner who stood on the walls. The entire population joined the effort, civilians building second walls behind every section the Hellepolis threatened to breach. Demetrius breached the wall. 1,500 of his best soldiers poured through the gap and pushed as far as the city's theater. The Rhodians rallied and fought them in the streets, killing or capturing every man who had entered. Not one made it back alive. In a single night, the Rhodians fired 800 burning projectiles and 1,500 catapult bolts at the Hellepolis. They managed to tear away some of the iron plating, exposing the timber frame beneath. Demetrius pulled the tower back before it burned. After a full year of fighting, Demetrius accepted that Rhodes would not fall. A peace was negotiated. He packed his army onto his ships and sailed away, leaving behind every siege engine he had built, including the ruined Hellepolis. The Rhodians melted down the iron plates from the Hellepolis and sold the remaining siege equipment. With the money, they built a statue of their sun god Helios at the entrance to the harbor. It stood over 100 feet tall. The world called it the Colossus of Rhodes. The siege of Rhodes proved that no machine, no matter how large, could break a city that refused to fall. 7,000 defenders held against 40,000 for a full year. Their victory was so celebrated that the monument they built from the wreckage became a wonder of the world. The Byzantines, burning an empire's fleet with liquid fire. In the summer of 717 AD, an army of 80,000 men and a fleet of over 1,800 ships arrived at the walls of Constantinople, the largest military force the Arab world had ever assembled. The Umayyad Caliphate had spent 20 years preparing for this attack. Their empire already stretched from Spain to India. Constantinople was the last obstacle between the Arab armies and the heart of Christian Europe. The city's landward defenses were the Theodosian walls, built 3 centuries earlier and never breached. 3 layers of walls, a deep moat, and towers every 60 feet. The Arab army had almost no siege equipment. Their plan was simple: blockade the city and starve it. On September 3rd, the Arab fleet tried to reposition into the strait to seal off the city's supply routes. Their inexperienced sailors lost the wind, and the ships drifted into a confused cluster at the mouth of the Golden Horn. Emperor Leo launched his trap. The Byzantine ships carried siphons mounted on their bows that sprayed a burning liquid the Arabs had never seen. It stuck to wood and flesh, burned on water, and could not be extinguished. The Byzantines called it liquid fire. History remembers it as Greek fire. 20 Arab ships were destroyed or captured in the first engagement. The rest of the fleet retreated and never attempted to pass the Golden Horn again. Constantinople's supply line from the Black Sea stayed open. The blockade had failed before winter even arrived. The winter of 717 was brutal. Snow covered the ground for 3 months, far colder than anything the Arab soldiers from Syria and Egypt had experienced. They began eating their horses, then their camels, then their donkeys. Disease spread through the camps. In spring, the Caliph sent reinforcements. 400 ships from Egypt and 360 from North Africa arrived carrying fresh troops and supplies. The Arab position looked set to recover, then the crews began defecting. The Egyptian fleet's crews were mostly Coptic Christians forced into service. They deserted to the Byzantines in large numbers, bringing detailed information about the fleet's positions. Emperor Leo used the intelligence to plan a devastating surprise attack. The Byzantine fleet struck the reinforcement fleets at anchor. The Arab ships, undermanned from desertions and unprepared for the attack, were helpless against Greek fire. Both the Egyptian and African fleets were destroyed in a single engagement. The Bulgars, allied with Constantinople through a treaty, attacked the Arab land army from behind. A 5,000-man Arab foraging party was wiped out entirely. The besiegers were now trapped between the walls ahead and a hostile army at their backs. On August 15, 718, after 13 months the Arabs abandoned the siege. The army marched back through hostile territory. The fleet sailed south. Of the 1,800 ships that had arrived, fewer than 5 survived the return voyage. A storm destroyed the rest. Of the original 80,000 soldiers, roughly 30,000 made it home. The rest died of starvation, disease, cold, or combat. The Umayyad Caliphate never attempted to take Constantinople again. The city would stand for another 7 centuries. Historians rank the defense of Constantinople in 718 among the most decisive battles in world history. If the walls had fallen, the Arab armies would have had an open path into Eastern Europe. The Greek fire, the walls, and one brutal winter saved a continent. The Knights of Malta, outnumbered 10-1 and refusing to fall. On May 18, 1565, nearly 200 Ottoman ships appeared off the coast of Malta, carrying between 40 and 50,000 soldiers. The island's defenders numbered fewer than 9,000. The Knights Hospitaller had been driven from Rhodes 40 years earlier by the same Ottoman Empire. They had rebuilt on Malta and spent years raiding Ottoman shipping. Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent wanted them erased from the Mediterranean entirely. The Grand Master of the Knights was Jean de Valette, 70 years old, a former galley slave who had been captured by pirates and freed by his own men. He had spent months preparing the fortifications. He knew the Ottomans would come for Fort St. Elmo first. The Ottomans began bombarding Fort St. Elmo with everything they had. Cannons fired thousands of rounds. The walls crumbled. The defenders patched holes with sandbags and timber at night, knowing each dawn would bring another barrage. The defenders of St. Elmo held for 31 days. When it finally fell, nearly every man inside was dead. The Ottomans had expected to take the fort in 5 days. The delay cost them their most experienced commander, the Corsair Admiral Dragut, killed by cannon fire. After St. Elmo fell, the Ottomans turned on the 2 remaining positions, Fort St. Michael and Fort St. Angelo. The fighting was hand-to-hand. Defenders poured boiling oil and burning hoops of pitch over the walls onto the soldiers climbing below. The Ottomans launched a combined land and sea assault on the Sanglea Peninsula. Ottoman swimmers pushed a floating bridge toward the walls, while troops attacked from the landward side. The defenders smashed the assault from both directions and pushed them back into the water. In August, the walls were breached and the Ottomans nearly broke through. De Valette, at 70 years old, grabbed a pike and led the counterattack himself. The sight of the Grand Master fighting in the breach rallied the exhausted defenders for one more stand. An audacious raid turned the battle. While the Ottomans threw everything at the walls, a small force of knights rode out and attacked the Ottoman field hospital and camp. The attackers panicked, thinking a Christian relief army had landed. They pulled back from the walls. By late August, the Ottoman army had lost a third of its men to fighting and disease. Summer heat baked the island. Fresh water was scarce. The remaining soldiers had lost the will to storm walls that never seemed to fall. On September 7th, a Christian relief force of roughly 8,000 Spanish and Italian soldiers finally landed on the northern end of the island. The reinforcements had taken 4 months to arrive. They positioned themselves on a ridge and waited for the Ottoman response. The Ottoman commander ordered a full retreat to the ships. He stopped halfway, realizing the relief force was smaller than he feared, and turned his army back for one final assault. The Christian forces routed the exhausted Ottomans on open ground. The siege of Malta lasted 4 months. The Ottomans lost over a third of their army. The knights lost roughly half their number. The island's forts were reduced to rubble, but the banner never came down. Voltaire later wrote that nothing was better known than the siege of Malta. De Valette used the funds that poured in from Christian Europe to build a new fortified city on the peninsula where Fort St. Elmo had stood. He named it Valletta. It still stands today, built on the ground where 9,000 men held against 50,000 and refused to fall. If you enjoyed this video, hit the subscribe button for more. Drop your thoughts in the comments below and see you in the next one.